Recording. And now we are recording. All right. Thank you for attending today's session. Dr. Lee Jones in the house for you, coming to you live and direct out of Atlanta, Georgia. Our goal today is to talk about elections. We're going to talk about elections. Remember, you're taking this class in American government. You're taking this class by virtue of the political science department, right? A political scientist, a good political scientist, is going to proceed from a particular mantra, something that looks at the relationship between the people and the state, between the governed and the governors. Our mantra, something that we have said, like we are monks sitting on top of the political hill. You know, the monk he's going, he's doing that all day, right? So your mantra sitting on the political hill, you're saying to yourself that politics is about power. Politics is about power. We say that power is the ability to influence choice. And we also say the choices that matter are those that influence the allocation of scarce resources. Politics is about power. Yeah. So what we're talking about today is we're talking about elections, right? If politics is about power and power is the ability to influence choice, how do you make your preferences known in a democratic system? You're gonna vote. You're gonna vote. So look at that quote by Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln, the 16th president, the victor of the Civil War, the president who issued the Emancipation Proclamation for all its faults, right? The president who was assassinated. Abraham Lincoln once said, "The ballot is stronger than the bullet." I wonder if you folks are familiar with your Malcolm X, 1964. Malcolm X indeed gave the ballot, or the 1963, the ballot or the bullet speech, right? That how can the ballot be stronger than the bullet? I just showed you folks a second ago. Here is my application for a ballot. This is a piece of cardboard paper. How can this thing be stronger than a bullet? Let's think about Thomas Paine. You'll remember Thomas Paine, right? We used Thomas Paine earlier in the semester because Thomas Paine, I'm trying to find this thing here. Thomas Paine is one of the key founding fathers, right? We call Thomas Paine the father of the American Revolution. It's Thomas Paine that writes the pamphlet Common Sense that influences Americans to want to join the war effort, fight under the leadership of George Washington. You'll recall that John Adams said, without the pen of Paine, the sword of Washington would have been left in vain. So Thomas Paine, we use Thomas Paine to say these are the times that try men's souls. And in this age of COVID-19, isn't that the truth? Matter of fact, let's do that whole quote, right? Thomas Paine, in Common Sense, he said these are the times that try men's souls. The summer patriot, the summer soldier, and the sunshine patriot will in this crisis shrink from the service of their country, but he that stands by it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Coronavirus is not easily conquered. So now, back to our point about elections. Thomas Paine, in 1795, he said the right of voting for representatives is the primary right by which your other rights are protected. That line will be on the test. He said the right of voting for representatives is the primary right by which your other rights are protected. Excuse me, Thomas Paine, but what is the right that protects your other rights? Like, what is the right that protects your freedom of speech? What is the right that protects your due process? What is the right that protects your ability to be free from unreasonable search and seizure? Thomas Paine said the right to vote. Continue. To take away this right is to reduce a man to slavery, for slavery consists in being subject to the will of another, and he that has not a vote in the election of representatives is, in this case, Thomas Paine says, a slave. The right then to vote is so important. It finds its way inside the U.S. Constitution. Let us go to the U.S. Constitution. That's what type of government class we are. Can you have a basketball class where you don't get on the court? Can you have a swimming class where you never get wet? Well, how can you have a government class if you don't dive into your constitution? Some sections where the right to vote is, you know what, Alex, for Thomas Paine and for our talk today, yes, if you don't want to vote, then you are giving up your power to let someone else tell you how you should live, where you should go, what you should do. What you think about that, Alex? Okay, so the right to vote is such an important concept. We find that it is embedded, it is injected multiple places inside your U.S. Constitution. Let's find the right to vote in Article 1, and let's pay attention to Section 2, Clause 1. We've done this before. Can I highlight on this thing? Yeah, I can highlight, right? So Article 1, Section 2, Clause 1, it says the House of Representatives shall be composed of members chosen every second year by the people of the several states. That the people are choosing members of the House of Representatives. Okay, well, what activity are these people engaged in such that they are choosing their representatives? We call that elections. If you are participating in an election, what really are you doing? You are voting. Therefore, the right to vote is embedded in, not even implied, right? It is literally stated right here in Article 1, Section 2. Now, you see here that the Constitution says, and the electors in each state shall have the qualifications requisite for electors in the most numerous branch of the state legislature. That is to say, that the states are in charge of determining who has the ability to vote. Let's back that point up. Let's go to another section. Let's go to Article 1, Section 4, and then we'll go to Clause 1. Article 1, Section 4, Clause 1. Your Constitution says the times, places, and manners of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. Who's in charge then of elections? The states. Who's in charge? Let's go here. Who's in charge of determining whether or not, almost there, hold on. Who's in charge of determining that the coronavirus is so serious that you should delay the vote? The state. And as we see here, the state of Wisconsin decided that they didn't think so. Wisconsin said, you know what? We know it's a pandemic and all of that, and we know that, COVID-19 is wreaking havoc. However, we're still going to hold the Wisconsin primary today, and this is April 7th. The U.S. Supreme Court, so they were sued when they did this. The U.S. Supreme Court was asked to, render a decision on whether or not they would make the state of Wisconsin delay today's primary, and the Supreme Court, that was real dramatic. I wonder if you guys heard that. I should let that play for a while. But yeah, the Supreme Court said no, they're gonna let the election go on. And so that's what's happening right now, right? Remember, poll workers tend to be senior citizens. Let's get this out of here. And so that might have some ramifications that we'll see play out. And so Article 1, Section 2, Clause 1 says that people have the right to vote. Article 1, Section 4, Clause 1 says that voting is a state function. Therefore, elections are a state function. States determine who's eligible to vote. And the Constitution says those voters can also vote for the federal legislature. You'll recall, as we said a couple of chapters ago, political parties are not inside the U.S. Constitution. Now, let's pay some attention. Let me skip forward. Let me see what I'm getting ready to talk about. Okay. Let's pay some attention again to the U.S. Constitution. Remember with me, we looked earlier in the semester, we looked at the Constitutional Convention of 1787 in the summer of Philadelphia. Remember, we looked at the picture and I was asking you folks, where are the women? You said there were no women. I said, where are the poor people? Look at their clothes. There are no poor people in this room. I said, where are the blacks, the Latinos, Latinx, the Asians, the Native Americans? Where's anybody else in the room? And there were no people in the room. And that is metaphoric or symptomatic of the ability to vote in the United States from the time it was the United States, rather, the Constitution was ratified, right? And so from 1788, ratification of the Constitution, up until at least 1828, the first mass election, you only had wealthy white males able to vote. So the history of voting in the United States, or the story of the expansion of suffrage in the United States, is a story of people making this country live up to its ideals, right? Early in the history of the country, you might have kept women out, you might have kept people of color out, but white males that were poor said, wait a minute, this is our country too. We want to be able to vote. And then various movements occur, right? After the Civil War, African American people said, hey, we want to be able to vote too, right? And then the Civil Rights Movement, and then the women's suffrage movement. And so the story of the expansion of the right to vote in the United States is the story of conventional and unconventional forms of political participation. All right. So what we have here is this country, there's a tradition in the United States embedded in the Democratic or Republican ethic to make this country live up to its ideals. I wonder if you can tell me what document proclaims proudly that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and by extension should have the right to vote. That is, do you know what document that is? Dean Irwin for the win, the Declaration of Independence. One more. What document is it that proclaims loud and proud at the first sentence of it, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, Ignacio for the win, Tory for the backup, right? The Constitution, the preamble says, we the people. And then there's this other document, literally a speech, where an individual said that this is a government of the people, by the people, for the people, and it shall not perish from the face of the earth. Do you folks know that one? He started off the speech by saying 407 years ago, right? We're talking about the 16th president, Alex Olive, Abraham Lincoln, yes, Josiah, the Gettysburg Address. So our goal is to make sure, well, not our goal is to acknowledge that this country, the right to vote, watch my hands. Can you folks still see my face? Am I still on camera? All right. It doesn't, okay, you can still see me, all right. So look, the right to vote when the country was founded is really, really small, right? Only wealthy white males. But then over the course of time in American history, the right to vote eventually becomes universal. It's not as if this thing happened automatically, right? It's not as if this just happened, just boom, magically you wake up and black people can vote, right? So over the course of American history, conventional and unconventional forms of participation. Let's go back to the Constitution and let's count down some of these amendments. Yes, these amendments are important. Yes, these amendments will find their way to not only your test 4, but also onto the final exam. Let's pay attention then to the 15th vote. Remember, Alex, that states are in charge of determining who can vote. And so some states say yes. I don't know about prisoners actively in prison, but let's say people who have, gotten out of prison, served their time, whether or not ex-cons can vote. Some states say yes, some states say no. Let's turn our attention to the 15th Amendment. Ms. Collins, I would like for you to know for test 4, Amendment 15, 17, 19, 24, and 26. Yes, that'd be good to know, right? Thank you for joining our little discussion today. If you could kindly mute your line, that'd be real nice. Okay, let's go to the 15th Amendment. Uh, let's see if I got this right. Yeah, 15th Amendment, the 1870. We're talking about after the end of the Civil War in the Reconstruction period. The 15th Amendment says the right of citizens to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, previous condition of servitude. Yes, hey, Benjamin, throw that 19th. All right, what are you saying there, Benjamin? Are you neglecting women's rights? Throw that throw that 19th Amendment in there. So the 15th Amendment, please put in there that when it was originally ratified, the 15th Amendment is to allow African American men the right to vote, allowing men the right to vote, right? Black men, right? Remember, this follows on the heels of the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment ends slavery except as punishment for a crime. Hashtag the 13th documentary on Netflix, right? The 14th Amendment says if you're born in the United States, you're a citizen, and it says that citizens have rights. So that is to say that newly freed African Americans are now citizens with rights. And then we go to the 15th Amendment, newly freed African American men, amongst those rights, have the right to vote. Here, Tori, have the right to vote. Okay, so that's the 15th Amendment. Let's keep that in mind. Let's pay some attention to the 17th Amendment. You'll remember with me, well, I don't know, let's do it. Let's go to Article 1, Section 3, before we read your 17th Amendment. Article 1, Section 3 here says that the Senate shall be composed of 2 senators from each state, but then how are you going to choose them? The original writing of the Constitution was to say that these folks would be chosen by the state legislature, chosen by the state legislature. That is to say, the states would determine who's going to be in the Senate, not the people. Well, by the time of the 17th Amendment, you have a progressive movement, the Bull Moose Party, the second run for president under the leadership of Teddy Roosevelt, popular economic-based revolutions and the strength of unions, all of that stuff combines such that the country is moved to ratify the 17th Amendment, where the 17th Amendment says the Senate shall be composed of 2 senators, but these people will be elected by the people of the states. The 17th Amendment then says senators will be elected by the people of the states. Let's move on to the 19th Amendment. I cracked a good joke on Mr. Jackson a second ago. The 19th Amendment, you'll keep in mind famous names like Ida B. Wells, Sojourner Truth, Anna Julia Cooper, Maria Stewart. You'll keep in mind names like Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Mary Church Terrell, right? These are proud women who, these women were in various points in time, right? Alice Paul and the what do you call it when you don't eat? The not the strike, right? But a food strike, starvation, a famine. It's running away from me. But the 19th Amendment is the proud result of, women pushing for the right to be able to vote. And you have a success here where the 19th Amendment is ratified 1919, 1920. The 19th Amendment says women have the right to vote. Let's push forward in American history from 1920. Now we're going into the civil rights period. Recall with me that American citizens have decided, you know what, it's time to end segregation, break the back of Jim Crow, and open up society to first-class citizenship for African Americans. How do you do that? One of the things you have to do is allow Black people the unfettered ability to be able to vote. And so that's what we have here in the 24th Amendment. The 24th Amendment ratified in the middle of the Civil Rights Movement, 1964. The 24th Amendment in total says the poll tax is unconstitutional. No more poll tax, or voting should be free. You don't have to pay money to register to vote. The 24th Amendment. And then We'll pay some attention to Amendment 26, concurrent, concurrent with your uh, civil rights movement is the anti-Vietnam War movement, right? Remember, this country was engaged in a drastic struggle against the forces of communism and the North Vietnamese, right? The United States proceeding from what's called the domino theory. The supposition, erroneous supposition, was that if you allow, southern South Vietnam to be overrun by North Vietnam, then you would allow the communist takeover of that part of the world. And if you can allow the communists to take over South Vietnam, then they would take over Cambodia, they would take over Laos, and they take over most of Asia. And then the United States all of a sudden would voted in the United Nations, right? Is that true, Josiah? For the Vietnam War, is that true? Josiah, I have been watching on Netflix the excellent, is my second time watching it, excellent documentary done by Ken Burn on the Vietnam War. Have you seen some of that? What relations, did you lose uncles or so? Right? Okay, Taylor Jones. Yes, I have in fact watched that Tiger King, but that's something else. We're not going to go with that crazy guy, right? We're not going to go Tiger King. I'm trying to be serious, talk about the Vietnam War. So, hey, Josiah, pay some respect to your second cousin, AJ Bottom, and watch that watch that Vietnam War documentary. It is comprehensive. It gives you the North Vietnamese side. It tells you things about Ho Chi Minh and Chairman Deng, and it's all, it's just a real good documentary. All right. In the midst of the conflict, it's literally called Vietnam. It's on Netflix. It's like, I don't know, something like 8 one-hour episodes. In the midst of the Vietnam War crisis, you have the country acknowledging that the average age of a Vietnam soldier is 19. And prior to the 26th Amendment, 19-year-olds couldn't vote, right? And so the country is essentially saying, if we can send 19-year-olds off to war, then they should be able to vote on the people that are going to send them to war. Hence, your 26th Amendment. The 26th Amendment says 18-year-olds have the right to vote. So let's move the Constitution off to the side, right? So that's what we're talking about here. I want you to keep some of those, keep those amendments in mind. How much time left? 5 minutes left. I wanted to make sure I didn't wear you out, right? So I wanted to keep these things to about a half hour or so, at least the recordings. Okay, so we're saying that politics is about the use of power to make choices about value-based decisions and how to allocate scarce resources with authority. When you go to vote, there are some questions that you probably want to ask yourself, right? Like, do you know what you want the government to not do to you? Do you know what you want the government to do for you? And does that knowledge drive your vote? In the political process, there are definite winners, as in the billionaire 1% class. And then there are definite losers, as in 26% of the country, 16% of the country that's under the poverty line. On what side are you? When you go to vote, do you get the things that you want? And are you often on the winning side of the election? Not does your candidate win, but does your candidate winning give you what you want out of the political system, right? Or when you vote, are you on the losing side? How much power do you and your family, immediate family, and your extended family, and the communities that you live in? Remember, the reality of America is that we are still in segregated communities. Poor, let's say, poor people tend to live next to other poor people. Black folks, white folks, Latino folks tend to live in communities that are isolated along racial lines. That is true. So how much power do you and everybody like you, how much power do you have to get the things that you want from the government? You say you have power, where you get that power from? You say you're voting. Is that true? Are you actually voting? And is your vote efficacious? Are you getting the things that you want from your ability to vote? Okay, so another definition that we're going to put on the test. I want you to pay some attention to, and I think I'll stop the recording with this. We want to pay some attention to the standard socioeconomic model, SES, or the standard socioeconomic model. Miss Imani says she just votes to be active. Well, that is good, but eventually, let me go here. Eventually, I want you to vote to exercise power, right? Voting to be active is good, right? But all right. So the standard socioeconomic model says you can, one, explain, and then second, you can predict how you can predict who's likely to participate, right? You can predict how people are voting. By demographic, what we mean, CNN exit poll 2018. What we're saying here is that you can look at a person's racial characteristics, you can look at their economic dimensions, you can look at their age, you can look at their education, you can even look at their gender classification and use those characteristics to explain people's political behavior. You can use those characteristics to answer questions and therefore predict what's likely to happen, right? So let's pay some attention. Let's go here to the CNN exit poll. The standard socioeconomic model says that you can look at how people are participating. All right, what we're looking at here, it doesn't say it on here, but this is from the 2018 midterm elections. That's what these polls are relative for, right? So you can look at, the point here would be to say you can look at the 2018 election and predict what's going to happen in the 2020 election, but you have to control for quarantine pandemic for this year, right? But outside of the quarantine, let's say hopefully it's all done by September, November, October, you can predict what's going to happen in 2020 by looking at what happened in 2018. So let's take, for example, gender. What this election here says is that in 2018, 59% of the female vote went to Democrats, 51% went to no, let's read this differently. Of the women that voted, 59% of those women voted Democrat. There you go. And of the men who voted, 51% of those men voted Republican. So you can somewhat predict that women in 2020 are going to choose the Democratic candidate. Why? Because it happened in 2018 and also happened in 2016. That's one of the truisms. Another example of the young people that voted in 2018, they voted Democrat. And the older people in 2018 split their vote rather evenly between Democrats and Republicans. So if the question is which political party is going to do well with young people in 2020, you have to say empirically that it would be the Democrats. Now, let's look at those numbers though, right? Let's say if you think someone is young when they are underneath the age of 29, you see that that's only 13%, right? There's more, by far, more than, so I'm just saying 13% is not a lot of people. That means young people tend not to vote, right? And then you look at things by race, and you'll find that people of color in the United States supported the Democratic Party in 2018. You could probably, I don't know if you folks know your soul train, right? But Don Cornelius used to say, you can bet your bottom dollar, right? It's all going to be a stone gas, honey. You can bet your bottom dollar that in 2020, people of color will vote for the Democratic Party. And while the white vote will be narrowly split, they will edge, white votes will go to the Republican Party. And so once you control for age, class, education, gender, you can just put those things together. And that's what we're talking about here when we look at the standard socioeconomic model. You're using demographic characteristics to explain, to analyze, and predict people's political behavior. Okay, so I am going to end the discussion here. I whipped out this book earlier, and guess what? I didn't get to it, right? But I'm going to do so when I open up the room for the next class. And so absolutely, it'll be good for you to pay attention to both those recordings. And then, no, I'm not going to get done with it. So here's the book, Abigail. This is some old school stuff, right? An instructor's manual. I have the instructor's copy, but the thing is like 25 years old. And so that's what this is. Yes, so please listen to part one, which is what we'll call this. You listen to part two, and then you'll listen to the other recordings that I post on Thursday. All right, so I'm going to end this recording somehow. Yeah, I'm going to end this recording right now. Thank you for attending.